morning, everybody, and welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us here on the program where we cover the most interesting live trials and legal stories in the news today. We have a lot going on today, so I want to get started right now. For anybody who doesn't know what's been happening in the Charles Merritt Mcstay family murder case, we have a special report to update you about what's been happening in that courtroom, so take a look.
Charles Merritt is facing murder charges for allegedly killing a family of four and burying their bodies in the desert. Joseph, Summer, Gianni, and Joseph Mcstay Jr. vanished from their Southern California home on February 4, 2010. Police found no evidence of struggle or foul play, but did identify signs that the family left in a hurry. The family car was found 4 days later abandoned at the Mexican border with no sign of the Mcstays. Law enforcement eventually believed the family fled to Mexico. Surveillance video at the border showed a family of four resembling the Mcstays crossing the border on foot. Officers also found search history on the family computer about travel to Mexico and passports for children. But a grisly discovery came nearly 4 years later when an off-road motorcyclist discovered the partial remains of a child's skull on the outskirts of the Mojave Desert. A search revealed 2 shallow graves containing the remains of 3 more bodies. DNA and dental records matched the bodies to that of the Mcstay family. A 3-pound sledgehammer was buried with the bodies. The family had been bludgeoned to death, according to prosecutors. As law enforcement was investigating the Mcstay's family disappearance, San Diego detectives interviewed Charles Merritt, a business partner of Joseph Mcstay. According to the affidavit, it was determined that Merritt was the last person to see and talk to Joseph alive. The two had met at a fast food restaurant before the family went missing. The last cell phone activity on Joseph's phone was a call to Charles Merritt. Merritt's DNA was also found on the family car abandoned at the border on the steering wheel, the gear shift, and the radio. He claimed he never driven the car, but rode in the passenger seat with Joseph 6 weeks prior to when the family went missing. Charles Merritt is pleading not guilty to the charges. Defense attorneys are pointing to another business associate as a possible suspect. Merritt is facing 4 counts of murder. For Law and Crime, I'm Rachel Stockman.
Thanks, Rachel. Great reporting. And now let's break down what's been happening in this case. I want to bring on criminal defense attorney Matthew Mangino. Matthew, it's good to see you. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I want to start right now. with the Charles Merritt case. I got to tell you, as I look at this case, I'm not really sure which way I stand. There's parts to this evidence that really seems to strike that Charles Merritt may be responsible for brutally killing this family. And then I also see the defense saying there might be some reasonable doubt here. I'm not sure which way I stand. Which way do you stand?
Well, it is an interesting case, and, it's a circumstantial evidence case, and those are difficult cases to pursue as a prosecutor. They're not impossible, certainly. You can piece together a case from individual pieces of evidence. We certainly don't have, an eyewitness. There is some DNA evidence, but there might be an explanation for that. So it's an interesting case. It's a difficult case from the prosecutor's standpoint, and it provides, some fuel for the defense in terms of suggesting reasonable doubt.
Yeah, I see motive, I see opportunity, I see evidence linking him to the gravesite and also the family home where it's maybe possible those murders may have occurred. So it goes both ways. We're going to have to talk more about it a little bit later on in the program. Right now, though, let's focus our attention on New Jersey because we're eagerly anticipating the feed in the Jeremiah Monell case. So yesterday was interesting. We saw the testimony of James and Crystal Greer. These are family friends of Tara O'Shea Watson, people that knew her so well. And they were some of the first people to discover what ultimately happened that night to Tara. Let's start with the testimony of James Greer.
At some point, do you recall Tara and the defendant leaving your house?
I do not recall them leaving. They were still at my house when I left to go take care of some business.
Okay. Where was Jeremiah's truck when you left?
When I left, it was still behind my house.
Okay. And do you recall arriving home later that night?
Yes.
It was Jeremiah's truck there when you came back home?
No.
Do you recall what time you got home?
It was late. It was after 1 o'clock, I believe.
1 o'clock in the morning?
Yes.
Did you go to bed after coming home?
Yes.
What happened when you woke up the next morning on the 19th?
I was sleeping and my wife got up to get my daughter ready for school, and she was waiting for Tara to bring the kids down to catch the bus outside my house that morning, and my wife came in and woke me up.
Without saying what she said when she came to wake you up, what was your reaction?
I jumped out, literally out of a dead sleep. My wife told me what was going on.
And what did you do after hearing what your wife said?
I had made a phone call to a friend of mine, and we went down to Tara's house.
And were you able to get inside of Tara's house?
Yes.
What door did you go through?
We went in the back
door.
door.
What did you see when you got inside?
I saw nothing out of the ordinary at first.
Where did you see something out of the ordinary?
When we got to the living room.
What did you see in the living room?
There was a blanket on the floor.
And did you do anything after seeing the blanket?
I didn't react at first until my friend had raised the blanket up, and all I saw was her face.
When you say your friend, who is your friend?
Glenn Atchison.
Well, can you describe what you saw once the blanket was lifted up?
I only saw her face covered in blood.
Okay, whose face did you see?
Tara O'Shea's.
Okay, can you even imagine having this young boy running to your house and saying that his mother was just killed by the father, and then having to go see what was happening? Let's move on now to Crystal Greer, who also talked about this really, really hard day.
And I went home and got Bella ready for bed.
About what time did you go to sleep that night?
Maybe around 9, 10, around in there.
When you got back to your house, where was the defendant's truck?
Behind my house.
Do you recall hearing anything later that night that caught your attention?
It was around like 11:30. I thought I heard his truck fire up, and he got sound like he left, but I wasn't awake.
Based on his response, what did you actually believe at that time?
I didn't think it was true.
When you got down to the house, Tara's house, what happened once you got down there?
I went in through the back door.
When you mean the back door, if you're looking at the house, which side was the door? That door?
On the left.
And what happened once you got inside?
I went in, as soon as you walk into her home, through the back door is her bedroom, and then there's the hallway. So I walked up the hallway, closed the bathroom door because it was open and it would block the hallway. And then I closed that and went through the curtain that was hanging and into the kitchen and then into the living room.
And what did you see once you got into the living room?
Frozen blanket on the floor with a body underneath.
Did you recognize the blanket?
Yes.
What did you recognize that blanket from?
It was Sarah's favorite blanket, and Tara used to curl up on the couch with it.
And what was your reaction to seeing that blanket on the floor?
Shock. I didn't believe it. I didn't touch anything, so I just went and opened the front door and went out.
Very important witnesses yesterday for two reasons. One, they helped establish the timeline, which was confirmed by Jeremiah Monell Jr., this young son, and they also confirmed another fact, which he said, that the father, the defendant, was at the house before the killing of Tara O'Shea Watson, fixing her car. So it's really important that they confirm those details. Matthew, we're waiting today to see what the defense does if they put on a case. So I got to ask you, you think they're going to put on a case?
Well, I think that they almost have to put on a case. The evidence in this case from the prosecution has been compelling. I think that the question is, will they put Jeremiah Monell on the witness stand himself as a defendant? But if there's anything that they can do to try to break up this timeline through other witnesses or other testimony, I think they're going to have to do that.
We've had other analysts question whether or not they're going to put on a defense that, he was in a certain mental state, and that's something to consider as well. We're going to have to see. We're expecting to be live in that courtroom today, maybe in 45 minutes, maybe sooner. We'll let you know. What I do know is we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we do have a lot more to discuss, so stay tuned here on Law and Crime. We'll be right back. Okay, Matthew, I guess we're learning like what was on the defendant's person. And one of the other interesting aspects is how valuable is this testimony, but also the idea that the defendant was apprehended after a 2-week manhunt. Does that play into the jury's consideration at all?
Well, it should, because flight it can be indicative of an acknowledgement of guilt. So he knows that this homicide occurred. He's unavailable. It's the mother of his children. So it's indicative of trying to evade apprehension. So certainly it's important.
Yeah, I mean, we're still trying to figure out what the defense is going to do today. I can't really stress that enough. We're all waiting to see if they're going to put on a case or will they go directly to closing arguments. Let's continue on, though, with Detective Michael Hughes from the New Jersey State Police Department. He also testified yesterday about this collection of items. So it was a combination of these two officers. And again, the state has officially rested. Let's now go to this testimony from yesterday.
Detective Hughes, did you later continue to assist in the investigation on January 27, 2017?
Yes.
What was your involvement on that date?
I was advised that the defendant's father had turned in a white garbage bag with items to Detective Weber. Detective Weber had received a warrant to search the bag, and myself and Detective Sergeant Crane executed that warrant, photographed and collected the items of evidence within that bag.
Where was that search conducted?
At Buda Station, I believe.
And do you recall the items that were recovered out of the bag?
I'd have to refer.
Actually, I'm going to go through those with you at this time. Those items that were found in the bag, were they later secured and collected by yourself?
Yes.
And first I'm going to ask you to look at S54. Do you recognize what is here as S54? Bless you. Bless you. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Is that your handwriting that appears on the outside of the bag?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and what was S54?
This item of evidence, MH57, and it's one white LG cellular phone in a gray case with a charger.
And does this bag appear to be in the same or substantially similar condition as when you collected the item and placed it and secured it?
Yes.
Next, I ask you to look at S55. Do you recognize what S55 is?
Yes.
Okay, and what is S55?
That's item MH58, and it's one black Samsung cellular phone.
Okay. S54 and 55, where were they obtained from?
They were recovered from the defendant. Or, I apologize, from the white glass.
Okay, so again, an understanding of a collection of items that were found in relation to the defendant. Matthew, I still want to harp on what the defense is doing. I can't do it enough. Is it possible they're going to introduce some expert testimony about maybe saying, yes, he killed her, but we have to understand what was his mental state at that time? Is there any way they can introduce that now, or is that too much of a surprise attack?
Well, it would be somewhat of a surprise if they have not shared an expert report with the defense, with the prosecution. And the prosecution had obviously not called any experts to counter such testimony. So that would be certainly problematic. But, if they have some explanation for why this information is coming in late, what kind of evidence developed during the prosecution's case that made it possible to bring that kind of evidence in, that would certainly be an issue as well.
Because if they just go directly to closing arguments and say, hey, listen, question the value, the credibility of each witness, jury, that's it, is that enough?
Well, the prosecution has the burden of proof. They have to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. If the defense believes that they haven't at this point, then, that's a strategic decision that has to be made that, hey, we don't have to present any evidence. All we have to do is sum up our case in a closing, or the lack of their proof in a closing argument, and that's all we're required to do. And the jurors really can't say, hey, we didn't hear from the defense. That's really not, the defense has no responsibility to prove anything in this case.
Yeah.
The prosecution has to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I guess, look, at the end of the day, we're going to have to see. Maybe in a half hour, we'll see what ultimately happens. We expect to be live back in that courtroom. When we come back from our break, we're going to talk about the Charles Merritt Mcstay family murder case. But I do also want to let you know that we've just gotten an update in the Claudia Herring case that the jury has just left their site view. We expect to be live in that courtroom today with opening statements. We'll be right back. Okay, let's try to make sense of this. Matthew, are you getting the sense that what the prosecution is trying to say here is that the defendant tried to cover his tracks, after the fact?
Yeah, certainly. That's what it appears that he was trying to do, and that's what it appears as though the prosecution is trying to point out to the jury in this situation by going through these voicemails and setting up sort of a timeline and a reference to people who contacted the victim after his disappearance.
Yeah, and I mean, again, he had the opportunity, he had the motive, he had the access to the house. Again, we're trying to understand if the killings ultimately happened there. Let's continue on with Detective Troy Dougal. Again, this happened from yesterday, this testimony. Take a look.
As a detective, we follow our leads, we follow the evidence, and we chase down every statement and anything anyone ever claims happened. I have to put every one of those things to rest. So now we have the trooper at the border, which would indicate, without a good story behind it, that the Mcstays are missing, the trooper's at the border, there's nothing in the house I find that's suspicious, so why is the trooper at the border and where's the Mcstays? Well, there's the last known position of the vehicle. I happen to live in San Diego. I know that people frequently illegally park in those parking lots where the Mcstay vehicle was, and they illegally park there to walk across the border. So I sent a sergeant and another detective down to the U.S.-Mexico border to inquire with Immigration, Customs, and Border Patrol to find any camera that records on either side of the border and to collect all video for the 8th of February 2010 for future review.
And you found a video of what appears to be 2 adults and 2 small children?
I did, and that took quite a bit of work.
We've already heard some testimony. You showed that to the family.
Now we have a family crossing the border that generally fits the general description. Family members are more in support of that could be my family than they were against that could be my family. I don't know Joseph and Summer Mcstay or the little boys. I know them mentally, but I've never met them. I've never watched them walk. I've never seen them. So I'm going off of what the family's telling me. So I have some belief that could be the Mcstays going across the border. For me to continue an investigation across the border, we have 2 detectives on the Sheriff's Department still to this day that are international liaison detectives. I incorporated them too. They work, if I send them across the border, it's going to be Tijuana deep. They're not going much further than Tijuana. However, FBI has all kinds of people in Mexico that work for the FBI in the United States, and I can be in contact with them or work through our international liaison detectives to talk to the FBI in Mexico, and we chase down every lead. And we had a lot of leads in Mexico that I had to put to rest. We had family members that were absolutely convinced that they were in Mexico, Costa Rica, Belize. I chased down every one of those leads, regardless of who told me whatever they.
Matthew, one of the things we all remember in this case is that it's believed that at one point the surveillance footage shows the Mcstay family going into Mexico. It also sees that their car was near the border. Now, as it's been said, authorities have ruled out that that was them. But let's be clear for our viewers. Just because, and we had an expert on yesterday who explained this too, just because authorities ruled that out, that those were the Mcstays, is it a clear, definite, no possibility whatsoever that those weren't them? Is it possible they went to Mexico?
Yeah, it certainly would be possible, and it's certainly something that the defense is going to utilize, I would assume, because just because they've ruled them out, there's always a difference of opinion. You know, could this be the family walking into Mexico? Could this be the family on the videotape? Does it make sense that their vehicle's parked near the border? You know, yeah, that's certainly something that I think the defense is going to explore in this case.
At one point, it was even suggested that they were victims of a drug cartel killing, that a sledgehammer, which again we believe to be the murder weapon here, that was a common thing of one of the local gangs. Again, that theory has been ruled out. I guess my question is, in this kind of case, there's very strong evidence against Charles Merritt, undeniable. But what is reasonable doubt in this case?
Right, and the defense is going to explore all of those. You know, just because the police and investigators have ruled out a certain possibility, it doesn't mean that you can't continue to argue that possibility, that you can't continue to try to connect the dots with regard to these other possibilities, and at least establish some doubt with the jury.
And then again, I got to ask you, his tire tracks that matched his car or seemed to match his car, his cell phone pinging in the gravesite area 2 days after they go missing. Suspicious, Matthew, suspicious.
No question, and that's sort of the other side of the story. That's the other story. The defense is going to cultivate these other issues, but the prosecution is going to pound away at these specific pieces of evidence that tie him to these murders.
Well, either way, we have to learn more about their lives. So when we come back, we're going to take a break. Let's play you some more testimony from family and friends, and we'll learn a little bit more about the Mcstays. We'll be right back. Let's talk about some of these things. So we know that this witness, he was hired by the Mcstays to paint their home. And then he went to their home on February 17, 2010, again 13 days after the family went missing. And Matthew, we're listening to this, the idea that things seemed a little strange in the house, the idea that this paint, and particularly the fact that there was dried paint in a paint tray when he had instructed Summer to line the tray with foil, things that didn't seem to add up to his previous conversations with them. Should that strike us as odd?
Well, obviously the prosecution thinks that it's odd and wants to point this out to the jury. Obviously, we have a situation here where maybe this paint was used in a different manner in which that it was originally intended, that it was used to cover something up, that in some way, because the defendant had access to the house, that he'd be able to go in there and do something different that maybe covers a crime scene or something of that sort. So they're trying to establish that the defendant had access and things weren't what they should have been according to this witness.
And that's what they're arguing. Maybe they're right, but they're still putting on their case. That's not the only thing that this witness discovered that was a little strange in the house. Let's continue on with Mr. McCarger because he's going to talk about a futon cover. Take a look.
I walked in, and now, you know, especially because the dog was left there, it was so odd that they just reassured me that this dog goes everywhere with them, and I couldn't believe they would just leave him behind. And that was just, 2 days before I last saw them. So when I got there, I just was taking maybe a visual picture of what was there and what might be different from when I was there last.
Okay. What was Susan doing when you got there?
When I walked in, Susan, she let me in, and she was cleaning the kitchen.
How would you describe her mental state at that point?
I think she might have been emotional. I mean, she was, cleaning, working at cleaning the kitchen pretty good. And my first comment to her was, I have, the investigators completed their job here, and so, because apparently there's some eggs or something, some food, pre-prep stuff that was left on the counter. I think she told me. And so she was pretty much cleaning it all up.
Did you notice what had changed since the last time you had been in the house on the 3rd to what you were seeing now?
Well, I had taken some just visual snapshots. a couple things that stood out when I walked into the family room kitchen area was the futon. It looked like the cover was off, and I thought that was odd. And then I was a little maybe a little concerned that she was cleaning the kitchen too soon, because maybe there's some evidence or something. And so with her cleaning it today, I couldn't obviously make a comparison with the last day I was there.
Were the cupboards and doors and cupboard doors and drawers still out on the island in the floor where you had put in the paint?
Yeah, I believe that everything was still off because I never got back to repainting that. But I did notice tucked underneath, and I don't know if it's some of that tucked in underneath.
Matthew, let's talk about the futon cover. That's really what I want to focus on. So prosecutors are saying that Joseph Mcstay was wrapped in a futon cover at that gravesite in Mojave Desert. The defense, though, showed a photo that appeared to be a futon cover on top of the dryer in their house. What's interesting is what that was on top of the dryer. It might really have been a futon cover because it had a zipper and really looked like that. It should also be noted that whatever Joseph Mcstay was wrapped in, this blanket or material, it didn't have a zipper that a futon cover would have had. So I'm curious your thoughts on this based upon what this witness just said.
Well, I mean, I think the prosecution has to put out all the evidence that they can. So if there is some discrepancy about a zipper, what the victim is covered in at the gravesite, the potential futon on the washer. You want to get that evidence out in your case. You don't want to make it appear as though you're trying to paint a different picture than actually exists. That would certainly be something that the defense could jump on to try to show, hey, the prosecution is not being entirely truthful or forthcoming with regard to
and look, they're both building a case here, and you can look at it both different ways. I'll tell you what, let's take a break. We'll talk more about this trial and our other 2 live trials when we come back. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime. Okay, let's break down this case right now with criminal defense attorney Matthew Mangino. Matthew, this is a unique case for a lot of different reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is the defense is pointing to an alternative suspect, a third man, Dan Kavanaugh. It's always interesting to see when the defense does that. What do you think of their case so far of pointing the finger at somebody else?
Well, at this point, we're hearing, mainly the prosecution's case. Their case is going to be focused on Charles Merritt, certainly. So we're going to have to wait to see exactly how the defense intends to piece this case together in terms of an alternative murder.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, they're still going with there's a financial motive here, that he, too, wanted money out of the Mcstays. So, jury, don't stretch too far. Financial motive is clearly what happened here. It's just you have the wrong man. It wasn't Charles Merritt. It's Dan Kavanaugh. But we're not quite there yet. Let's take a step back and play a little bit more of Susan Blake again. This is Joseph Mcstay's mother.
Did you think that you should call law enforcement at that time?
No.
And it was kind of suggested yesterday, Ms. Blake, that this wasn't a big deal or there wasn't really any concern on the part of Joe's family at the time that the defendant came and wanted to talk to the family about him being missing. Were you concerned at this point on February 9th?
Yes, I asked him to move the dog bowls outside and the water bowl to see if they had gone out of town, and we could tell if someone was feeding the dogs outside.
Well, at that visit on February 9th that occurred, you had indicated prior to that you had a Monday-Tuesday schedule where you were off on those days. Is that right?
That's correct.
So you were on your 2 days off from work when he came to see you?
Correct.
Did you return to work the following day?
Yes, I drove back Tuesday.
Okay, so the same day on the 9th you drove back. Okay. And as part of your conversation with the defendant that day, did he indicate to you that he was going to do anything in terms of checking on Joe?
I'm not sure.
Do you remember talking to one of the detectives and telling them that the defendant told you he was going to go to the house?
Oh, yes, he did go to the house.
Well, that's what he told you he was going to do, correct? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Matthew, I want to talk about something that Susan Blake said. You know, people had access to the Mcstay house after they disappeared because it wasn't a murder investigation yet. It was just a missing persons investigation, but there's evidence there. And I remember at least one of the investigators was a little nervous that she was in the house, that the brother was in the house taking items. You know, what if you're sitting as the defense, is this just ammunition for you and saying, hey, look, tainted investigation, people were touching a lot of different things?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. You know, this is the kind of information that can really, you know, paint some doubt with the jury. Hey, this crime scene was never preserved. You know, the police go to great lengths to preserve a crime scene when they know, in fact, that it is a crime scene. You know, who comes in, who comes out, who inventories evidence, who you know, collects evidence. None of that's done here because, as you've indicated, this was a missing person. You know, so we have people in there cleaning the house, removing objects. It really adds to this whole idea that this whole potential crime scene was tainted, and there's that's something to build on from the defense standpoint.
Okay, well, you know, look, there's a lot that we're learning from this case, and I want to continue on with Susan Blake because she provided some very valuable information about what happened to, or what we think might have happened to the Mcstays. Let's keep going.
So, in between February and using June, was there a lot of stuff going on with your family?
Definitely.
Were you being contacted by various reporters and things like that?
Yes, and when passing out flyers and going to different area, posting pictures. And
were you keeping in contact with Detective Duval at that time period as well?
Yes.
Was there a time when he asked you to come in and look at a video from the border?
Yes.
Did you do that?
Yes.
What can you tell us about that?
He showed us a video of a family of 4 going over the border, and I knew it wasn't them.
Let me back up for a second. Could you see their faces in that picture?
No.
What could you see in the video?
How they walked, what they were wearing.
Was the video a clear-cut video?
It was fuzzy. Not real clear.
Could you ever see the family from the front?
No.
So just the back of them?
Correct.
Was there any confirmation that that was them?
No confirmation.
Did you hope it was?
I would have taken anything then.
Okay, Matthew, I want to talk now about financial motive here from the part of the defendant. One of the things you could argue is probably the strongest evidence is the fact that wasn't he writing checks to himself from the QuickBooks account, Joseph Mcstay's QuickBooks accounts, and wasn't he asking Susan Blake for money to keep the Mcstay business going? But isn't that kind of suspicious after they disappeared that he wants all this money?
Well, yeah, it certainly is. And, you know, it provides, you know, writing the checks certainly provides some motive for killing this entire family because you have a financial interest in which you're going to get a windfall. And certainly asking, you know, Joseph's mother for money to try to keep the business going is suspicious as well, since there was very little contact between him and Joseph's mother prior to him visiting her home. So those are certainly, you know, areas of interest for the prosecution and raise some suspicion with regard to Charles Merritt.
Yeah, and some people would argue, well, you're just going to kill somebody over a few $1,000s, and I'll say I've seen people kill for a lot less. Now, we're going to take a break, but before we do, I want to let you all know that we have an update in the Monell case out of New Jersey. As you know, the state has officially rested, and the judge just announced that they will return tomorrow at 9 a.m. As soon as we have more details, we'll let you know. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Okay, Matthew, I love having you on because you can help break down some things that might not be so obvious. Why do we care about this dog? What are we getting at from this testimony?
It would appear that they're suggesting that if this dog, or typically a Rottweiler, would jump in to defend their owner, that if this murder would have occurred at the home, maybe this dog would have reacted in some way to that. At least that's what I assume they were trying to elicit from this witness.
I guess it's confusing if the murders happened in the home, because there seems to be a real lack of evidence there. Yes, there seems to be some indication on the dining room table there might have been blood spatter. We couldn't definitively confirm that with proof, but one of the experts who came on the stand said, based upon his knowledge, even though it wasn't tested, it seems like it was blood spatter, and we're showing a video of this now. I'm curious, are you surprised if these killings happened there, we wouldn't be seeing more?
Yeah, it's very difficult to immaculately clean a crime scene. I mean, obviously, if the murders were conducted in the way that was suggested by the use of a sledgehammer and blunt force trauma, there's going to be quite a bit of blood and other tissue that may be spread throughout this house in terms of the crime scene. To be able to clean that up meticulously and leave maybe just one spot of blood would really be a stretch to suggest that that's where these brutal murders occurred.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of left with more questions than we have answers. Another question that I've always had is, whoever committed this, why would they leave the sledgehammer with the bodies?
Yeah, that's another a good question. Certainly, if you want to dispose of the sledgehammer, you might do it in a different place. But, does this feed into the defense's suggestion that maybe this was a gang-related drug cartel murder, and this is kind of the calling card? Hey, we leave the sledgehammer with the people that we murdered as a sign to other people who might cross us.
Yeah, and look, we're all trying to figure out what happened, but one thing we know for certain is this was a brutal attack and a tragic crime, especially when you look at this beautiful family with these two young children, just really awful. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about this trial so that you are fully prepared when it comes back live this afternoon. So stay tuned here on Law and Crime. Okay, Matthew, now I know you've had a lot of experience in the criminal realm. I'm curious from your perspective, listening to this detective, does this house appear to be the house of a crime scene in the sense that something nefarious happened there, somebody was killed? Or is it more a family who picked up and left suddenly? I'm curious what your opinion is.
Well, it appears to be a family that was living actively in their home and abruptly departed, which certainly wouldn't be indicative of somebody who's planning on taking off and going to Mexico. It almost appears as though the family's sitting there and for some reason they abruptly leave, which I think is important in this case.
It's so odd trying to piece together what happened to them. I mean, how do they go from their house to being found in the Mojave Desert? That's the question, really. Let's continue on with Detective Troy Dougal from the San Diego County Homicide Division, who can maybe explain a little bit more.
After you cleared the house and there's nobody in there, obviously, what'd you do next?
I backed out and I spoke to Mike Mcstay, the reporting party. We call it the reporting party. Person making the missing persons report.
And where did you talk to Mr. Mike Mcstay at?
My vehicle was parked on the residential street very near the house, and we sat inside my vehicle, and myself, Susanna Fisk, and Michael talked.
During the course of your conversation there with Mike Mcstay, well, as an investigator at this point, what are you trying to get?
So I had obviously some level of concern. It was a missing persons report, which traditionally doesn't mean there's any foul play. We get missing persons reports in San Diego County every week. Many times, most of the time, the person comes back home or is found in a hospital or in custody. Forgot to call home, and parents get worried and call. That's traditional missing person. That's the reason an area detective holds that report for 10 days and then it comes to homicide. Because I had showed up and talked to Deputy Tingley, knew that we were at 11 days, I found that suspicious, without doubt. I needed to talk to a family member and did talk to Mike Mcstay to get me to a place where, was this unusual? Had this ever happened before? Or, what level of concern are we at? When I was in the house, I talked about my observations. My primary objective when I go into a house on a missing persons case, to be able to walk through a house without a search warrant, I am truly searching for injured persons, deceased persons, persons who don't belong in the house, bad guys. And once that's done, I have to back out. I don't get to walk through, search, and examine from a detective's desire. On the other hand, because I was a homicide detective and got to clear the house with a patrol deputy, I did keep my eyes open to what I cared about on top of looking for what could be foul play. So that's why I preach exactly what I preached about what my observations were. That's not necessarily what every cop would look for. Once I came out and I talked to Mike Mcstay, he told me it was not typical for his brother and his family did not typically leave for 11 days. He was very concerned. On the other hand, he wasn't sure exactly when they had disappeared. He had a guess, and he had guessed that it was February 4th based on whatever research he had done. But he said it could have been somewhere closer to the 15th when I got there. He said there had been a time when his Joseph Mcstay had taken his family to some sort of weekend camping or retreat adventure, and they couldn't get a hold of Joseph. So this seemed out of the ordinary, but it wasn't crazy suspicious.
Did he tell you when he first went to the residence there in Avocado Vista Lane?
Yes.
When did he say?
He went on February 13th.
And did he tell you who he went with?
With the defendant.
Did he ever say anything about being there prior to February 13th?
No.
You already mentioned the defendant. Did you, during that conversation, learn about the name of Charles Merritt or Chase Merritt?
I did.
And was that from Mike initially?
Yes.
And were you able to obtain contact information for Charles Merritt?
I don't know if it was in the interview with Michael, but either within that interview or shortly after that, because I knew I needed to talk to the defendant.
And was the number you obtained or the number you contacted the defendant with, at least for the first year or so of this investigation, is that fair?
That's fair.
Was it the same?
It stayed the same.
Okay. Was that 909-374-0102?
That is the number.
And when you would contact the defendant during this investigation, that's the number you would use.
Okay, Matthew, I'm curious about something here. If the murder really did happen in the house, then the first question you'd be asking is, well, who had access to the house? Is that one of the reasons why the prosecution, the state, has gone forward with Charles Merritt, because he was so involved with the Mcstay's life? Is that really a reason why it's not just it can't be a random crime, or maybe it's not even this alternative suspect, Daniel Kavanaugh?
Well, I think certainly the prosecution is going to look at, who would have a motive, who would have an interest in seeing the Mcstay family dead. And I think that's the first place that they're going to look. I think this testimony is interesting because, again, this is, a classic missing persons case to begin with. But this detective is starting to connect the dots. Is this something unusual? Now, if the Mcstay family would have left town without announcing it to anybody frequently and had, mysterious kind of vacations where no one saw them for periods of time, that would shed a different light on this. But this was sort of an aberration. This wasn't something that they typically did, and this raised the suspicion of this particular detective.
And now they're all trying to find clues from the house. Again, we talked about the paint, we talked about the futon cover, we talked about the blood spatter. Let's take a break. When we come back, we clearly have much more to talk about in this trial, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. Everybody, we're still talking about the Mcstay family murder case, a tragic case, a trial of Charles Merritt, who has been charged with their brutal murders. And now we are dissecting testimony that you may have missed, so that when we go live there today, and again, we expect to be live there at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you will be ready. I want to continue on with the testimony of Detective Troy Dougal from the San Diego County Homicide Division, who's going to talk a little bit more about the crime scene. Take a look.
So now my question is, what were you looking for?
Okay. I'm looking for, primarily under the search warrant, evidence of the crime. I'm not looking for evidence of a missing person, although that would be nice too. I'm looking for evidence of a crime. And I now believe in my heart, or I can't take it to the judge, that a crime has committed, and I'm going to find evidence somewhere in those vehicles or residence that's going to take me further, where I can start to prove the crime and find these people.
Okay. So in that regard, you have a crime scene person with you, Dennis Williams?
She was my forensic evidence tech.
Okay. And you're going through the house and you're looking for potentially blood?
Yes.
Okay. You're looking for any signs of struggle?
Absolutely.
Any signs of forced entry?
Yes.
Okay. In your initial review, as you were going through the house, did you notice any of that?
No. Well, let me take that back on the back window.
Okay.
So that in the den of the residence, Michael had told me that in his statement to me on the 15th, I'm interviewing him in my car, and I said, how'd you get in the house? And he said, I met Chase on the 13th, and Chase had already been here. Chase had told me he had been here on the 9th. And Chase told me there was a back window open in the back of a secured backyard. And Michael, these are Michael's words, so I went to the backyard and I crawled in that unlocked, slightly ajar window, took the screen off, crawled in the window, and what I noticed as an investigator during the search warrant is there was a little bit of damage to the blinds, right there where he says I crawled in the window. I later asked him if he did the damage, and he didn't remember doing the damage. Not that it was a big aha moment, but he crawled in that window, and we have minor damage to blinds, and okay, that's what I got. So that's forced entry, but legitimate.
So, Matthew, I have a question for you. As we listen to this crime scene, you know, the house, we also know the gravesite where the victims were found. Is there a difficulty in prosecuting a case when you have that separation? The body's found in the Mojave Desert, but they're also looking at what happened at the house?
I mean, it can present some difficulty. Certainly, you know, I spent 8 years as a prosecutor, and you know, you have to deal with the evidence that you have. So you have what you think might be the crime scene within this home, but you have the bodies discovered in another place. Because so much time has passed, it's more difficult to try to connect those two locations. Had you found the bodies contemporaneously with you know, having a secure crime scene, then you might be able to piece other evidence, you know, blood in a vehicle or other things that could help, you know, paint a more vivid picture. But here you have a time elapse, you have two different locations, and it is a bit problematic.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not like you just have an open book and you know exactly what happened. We're still piecing together the information. Let's continue on with Detective Troy Dougal. His testimony was very vital to understand what was found in this house. Take a look.
Have you, in your career as a police detective, seen blood spatter?
I have.
So what you see in the bottom part of this photograph, you can't say it's blood, right?
I can't say it's blood. It's a horrible moment where I don't know what it is. I did not see it with my naked eyes when I was in the residence at all. And now that the district attorney zoomed it in, it puts a pit in my stomach, but I don't know what it is. I can't say it's blood, and I can't say it isn't blood.
Does blood dry in a specific pattern?
It does.
How does it dry?
No foundation.
Sustained with foundation.
You receive training as to how blood spatter or blood will dry.
I went to a 40-hour course by the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department for blood pattern analysis.
Does blood dry in a specific manner?
Yes.
How?
It traditionally, obviously, dries at where it's the thinnest on an object. If it's blood that's spattered onto an object, the outside or the thinnest edges are going to dry first, and then the thicker or the raised area is going to dry later. And in this, what you see is skeletonized. We call it skeletonized drop of something. Several of us sat at this table, and that was not seen because I'm going to go with light source. The naked eye, it's very close to the same color as the table, very small, and not obvious.
Okay, Matthew, I'm sitting on the jury. I'm looking at that. I have a witness who says in all those years it looks like blood spatter, even though it hasn't been proved. What am I thinking? What am I thinking now as I move into the continuing day of testimony today? I mean, what am I thinking about after looking at that?
I'm thinking that maybe the crime wasn't committed in that house. I mean, you have to listen to the totality of his testimony. He says, I have 10 guys working with me. We checked everything, baseboards, ceilings, walls, behind the toilet, all over the house. Yet the only thing that we found is something that we didn't even notice, which may be blood spatter on the table. Now, let's also think that these 4 people were bludgeoned with a sledgehammer. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, I'm sitting there as a juror saying, wow, this happened someplace else.
But maybe, because let's combine the testimony, maybe Charles Merritt, if he's the one, painted over the walls. If there was more blood, he painted over it. There was a discussion of the paint cans. The paint looked a little odd.
Yeah, there's no question that it was. But I think you have to think of it in the context of what a murder with a sledgehammer of 4 people would look like in terms of a crime scene. And would you be able to clean everything or cover everything but a little bit of spatter on a table?
Not sure, Matthew. I don't know, but I'll tell you one thing. It's raising questions both ways, and it's going to ultimately be up to the jury to decide this issue. Matthew Mangino, thanks so much for coming on. We really appreciate your insight.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we have a lot to discuss. 3 live trials today. Well, 2 live trials. A lot more to talk about, so stay tuned here on Law and Crime. We'll be right back.